Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke, and today's guest is Gayle Thomas. She is an intuitive channel, teacher, and author of the forthcoming book, Awakening to Channel. She channels her higher dimensional guides, a consciousness called Tarp, and teaches people how to connect and channel their own guides, as well as how to train their consciousness for Ascension. Gayle, welcome to the program.
Hello, John. Thanks for having me.
So you're an intuitive channel and also an ordained metaphysical minister. What came first?
The ministerial qualification, that came first. I started working really as a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher, actually yoga therapist and meditation teacher. And then that evolved to be a holistic spiritual coach. And then I studied to become a metaphysical minister, became ordained, and then the channeling happened. That's the order.
So when the channeling happened, I believe you were awakened to channel, which followed a cancer diagnosis.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, it was just, simply put, the most amazing experience of my life, the most profound experience of my life, completely unexpected, very abrupt and fluent was the whole process. I started channeling not from deliberately asking. I began channeling in a period of my life where I was very scared about having cancer. So being a mother with 2 teenage girls, I decided to embark on a healing journey that was to do with my own inner alchemy. So I decided not to go down the conventional healing path for cancer. I knew that if I was going to do this alchemical journey, that I'd have to dedicate full time to this. So I spent my days with self-care and self-love practices, which included, apart from diet and exercise and sleep and things like that, chilling out, it included a few hours of sitting still, prayer, affirmation, meditation, breath work. In this regular practice every day that I found myself on one particular day, sitting cross-legged on the floor, doing my meditation. And before I went deep into my meditation, I decided to just sort of try Jesus. So I asked Jesus, if you're there, could you help heal me? And I'd never done that before. I wouldn't say that I'd had a particularly religious upbringing. I wouldn't say that I belong to any particular religious denomination. But I do believe in Jesus, and I do have a strong sense of spirituality, and I believe in God. So I asked on this day, and that's when I had this kind of miraculous sensation come in and all around me. I felt him come all around me. I was completely overwhelmed with warmth and love, and my hand lifted off my lap. It wasn't me animating it. It was him in my hand, lifting my hand off my lap onto my breasts where I'd had my tumor, and I felt his hand go into my body, and I felt it warm. This must have lasted about 5 seconds, I think. And then I felt him go away, and I just had tears coming down my cheeks. I stayed in meditation, but I was very conscious what had just happened and very aware that this was probably the most special experience of my life. I felt so overwhelmed and so humbled. And my husband was sitting meditating next to me. He'd finished a few minutes before me, and he'd managed to witness my tears. He didn't understand my hand moving, what that was about, but he said, are you all right? And I said, it's actually tears of happiness. So the next day, I thought, I'm going to replicate exactly what I've done today. I couldn't wait to meditate, obviously. The next day, I thought I'd repeat everything that I'd done and see if he can come back again, although I'm not expecting it because I realised that I'd already had an experience that many people would like. And I went through the same process. At the end of it, I said, Jesus, if you're there, when you come again, will you heal me? And this time I felt him come in. I felt him come all around me. But he didn't go into my body. My hand didn't lift. But then I also felt something else come in, and that was Tarp. So the day after, I asked again. I did exactly the same thing. I didn't feel Jesus come in, but I felt Tarp there. And this is before I knew their name. I felt this presence, and then I started to feel that all my thinking was like communicating in a tunnel. I felt like I was speaking in a vacuum, and I felt my thoughts were being heard, and I started to hear things back. And then I started to ask questions, and I was getting answers. And day by day, they were moving my shoulder and my arms back behind my body while I'm sitting in a cross-legged position, and my neck would sometimes click. I felt like they were making adjustments to my alignment. Then they started being able to answer my questions with nodding my head up and down, like nods of yes and no. And then I asked, can I start to use sound to answer your questions? And they started to sort of contort my head and jaw to make me utter yeses and nos. It was like a baby learning to talk, like a baby babbling, learning to make the vowel sounds. It was like learning how to speak again because I was completely relaxed. I was in trance. So I was just really just sitting back, not helping at all with any movement of my body because I was just sitting in awe of this energy take over my body. And then eventually it was turning into words and, it happened quite quickly, able to say answers and sentences and then able to help other people with their questions. That's the way it developed.
This expanded consciousness that you call Tarp. First of all, how did the name Tarp come up? Did they tell you that's what they were called or?
Yeah.
Right.
After I could talk, I said, what's your name? Do you have a name? I'd ask questions about them. And they kept moving my head and I had the sound of ARP, and they kept moving my head in this kind of like arching kind of arc-like way. And so I kept saying, harp? And it was always a no. And then I said, if I pick up a pen, will I be able to write it? So I picked up a pen, I had my eyes closed, and what came out was the word tarp in like children's writing. And I said, are you sure? At the time, I was a little bit disappointed that it couldn't be something like Hector or Alexander or Jupiter's or something like that. Because it's like tarp, as in tarpaulin. Okay, tarp, all right? So it wouldn't be anything else. I tried to variate it. It wouldn't, and that's the way it stayed.
Did they tell you where they originate from, like a different star system or anything like that?
They did. They said they were Andromedan, which is not in our galaxy at all. It's another galaxy. I think it's the nearest galaxy to ours, the Milky Way. I asked about a specific planet, and they said that their way of telling me where it would be in a way that I wouldn't understand. And I didn't have the knowledge in my head to understand it. If I wanted to understand more, I'd have to learn a lot more about astronomy to be able to try and isolate the region that they were from. However, I was told that they're not physical beings. They're plural. They're a group consciousness. They're not individual. So they don't have individual names and they don't have a sex, not male or female. They're just a group consciousness.
Would you consider them to be light beings or?
Yeah, this is what I understand. Copies of themselves is not the right phrase. They are versions of me. They are versions of other beings. They're more evolved, clearly, than me, than us. I'm a part of that consciousness. They're a part of me. A human version. I'm not the only one. I am the physical human version. They've evolved out of individual consciousness. They have several other human beings, not even all at this time, not even all on this planet, that are in physical body, that are parts of them. Hence the bridge to be able to communicate with me. As I understood it, I'm not in isolation. We know of other channels anyway, but it seems to be that there are many other beings and life forms out there that have that link and a bridge, particularly to a certain individual on Earth, and that contact manages to happen that way. But it seems that on that day I tuned into the frequency to pick up on them and they just came in immediately.
There are humans in places other than Earth.
Humans on Earth, there are other beings that are physical beings that they're connected to.
Okay, but they're not on Earth. They're elsewhere.
They're probably beings on Earth, human beings on Earth that they're connected to, as well as beings that are physical on other planets.
So there are physical beings on other planets. Were they more what we would call aliens, or were they more humanoid, or did they not tell you?
Humanoid.
Interesting. Any particular planets, or are these planets in another galaxy far away?
I think they're very far away.
Really interesting, because a lot of us think there's got to be life forms elsewhere. There has to be.
I think it's ridiculous to think not.
Yep.
Even if you don't take my example of channeling and connection with them, it's just ridiculous that you would think there is no other kind of consciousness out there.
Yes, I think many of us can agree on that. So would there be any way to contact these other human forms wherever they may be, other than channeling?
Other than channeling. That's a stretch of the imagination there for me. Another way other than channeling, because I think our future is in the non-physical conscious field. I think it all is in channeling. So I don't think they're going to come down in spacesuits and present themselves until we're spiritually evolved. Our consciousness is evolved enough not to have such a shock to our physical system to see them. So I don't think contact can happen any other way than through consciousness.
What you said about the evolution of consciousness, eventually we will hopefully become less dense and more of a light being. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we are moving into the imaginal, where we're going to interiorize our body and exteriorize our soul.
Interesting.
It's going to invert. Yeah.
We'll definitely get back to that, but since we're talking about channeling, I often notice that some people do confuse a channel with a medium. Is there like an intersection of the two abilities or not necessarily?
I think the intersection is its transdimensional phenomena, medium or channel. Technically, I think you can use them to describe one another. I think they're interchangeable. However, I personally am more comfortable with the word channel, just because growing up, I did go to see mediums with my grandmother and my mum, and I associate them with being able to communicate with beings on the other side of humans, generally, that have passed over. That's what I think of when I think of a medium. But a medium really is just the same word as a conduit or channel. It's just the intermediary between transdimensional consciousness. But I call myself a channel. I prefer that.
When you were younger, speaking of which, were you able to sense spirits or anything of that nature?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yeah. I've always been quite skeptical. As I say, I believe in God and I'm very spiritual. There are things that really resonate and have always resonated with me. I've always felt a longing for space. I've always loved sci-fi. I've always loved the possibility of contact. I lost my younger brother quite a long time ago. He had a lung disease. I would have loved to have seen him. I had a few friends commit suicide, for example, while I was in my early 20s. I would have loved to have communicated. I would have loved that. But it never happened to me. I was not someone who saw ghosts. I never saw old people sitting on the end of my bed the way my mum would. I never had any of that. And I wish I had, but I never did. I just simply had a very mental mind, too analytical and too much questioning to let that come in.
That's interesting that you mentioned that as a young kid, you didn't see spirits, you didn't see ghosts. So that might be a good way to explain to someone that you can be a channel without the mediumship abilities.
Ultimately, it's kind of one and the same thing. I think what you end up communicating with is partly your choice, partly your attraction point. I'm not really interested in communicating with people that have passed on. When I started channeling, very soon after, I did experiment and I did communicate with my brother and I communicated with my husband's father in front of my husband, but I was not comfortable with it. I'm far more comfortable with communicating with Tarp, and now I had some time communicating with them. I'm happy to communicate with other beings, other entities, as long as they're as evolved as me or more evolved. I'm not interested in anything lesser than me. But I think there are people that just are interested in that and they want to help or communicate in that way. And that's absolutely fine. I think it's about what you choose as well.
It seems to me that you can talk to those who are past. It's just that you choose not to do that. You choose to focus on higher consciousness, beings of higher intelligence, beings that are more evolved. Are you ever tempted to ask them what's going to happen to the stock market in the next 2 months or start?
I tried that very early on. It didn't work. Of course, I tried that in the first few days.
Yeah.
My husband and I were playing games and I said, let's see if we can get numbers. You write the number down on a piece of paper and I'll tell you what you've written down. And the first 3 or 4 times it was correct. And just as my eyes widened with excitement, I got it wrong consistently every time after that. When I realised the implications, it just failed consistently.
Really?
That wasn't reliable at all.
I've been told by several mediums that anyone can do that, but they have to train. And the training is arduous, and there's certain things you have to be careful of. And they mention protection, because there are entities out there that are not so friendly. They're not all good. Do you get any of that kind of vibe from the Tarp consciousness that there are entities that you have to be wary of?
Well, Tarp are benevolent, and when I channel them, I feel bliss. I feel very happy and comfortable in trance with them. It's almost a bind to come back into my normal conscious waking state. I'm aware, of course, that other beings can come in. I am not frightened of them because I think that you can tell someone to bugger off. You can tell them, just go away, I'm not interested. Or I want a being that's at my level or more evolved. I know that I'm only a slave to somebody else's consciousness if I allow it, and I'm not interested. It doesn't entertain me at all. It's never happened to me. I've managed to communicate and channel a couple of other entities. When I'm training other people to channel, we do speak about protection and knowing the difference by the way you feel. You usually feel the difference. But personally, it's not something I'm too interested in. No one has ever come in bad for me, and I don't have time for that. I think there's a reason it hasn't come in, because I'm not into the drama of that. I'm not prepared to entertain it.
You just mentioned training us normal folk. How do we channel our higher selves and our spirit guides? Is there an intersection between those two? I've heard that several times. Sometimes our spirit guides are our higher selves, or maybe I didn't understand that.
Yeah, there's lots of overlap and blurring, and part of the problem with that is our limited language that we as humans are using. It's not a shared common language with transdimensional perception. They're using a language that is beyond the five senses and beyond English. Right, it's not just plain straightforward English, it's a vibrational language. So finding that common ground is first and foremost how someone is channeling. First of all, I'd say us normal folk includes me, because I wasn't someone that was born that way and I didn't have it when I was a kid. And that's why I believe if it happened to me, it's there in all of us. I don't believe there is anything different in me. And that's why I'm particularly on a mission to help people deconstruct ourselves, to bring back those latent abilities that exist in all of us. So it's a kind of unlearning that we need to do. More a case of getting over our subconscious mind, the way our conscious mind is decompartmentalized into like conscious, subconscious, unconscious. Everything's all set, and it tends to have a way of suppressing and invalidating transdimensional phenomena. In Western style societies where we've got systems and governments and belief systems and education systems where things are educated out of us in a sense. Whereas a lot of these indigenous or more native communities, they found it much more easier to go into altered states, be able to liaise with beings and spirits on the other side, who say on the other side in altered states, and bring that information back down and anchor it into normal waking consciousness. So how do we teach normal everyday people to do this? I've actually created a 10-step roadmap to channeling. If you go to my website, you can download that for free. It's kind of what is integrated into my channeling course. It's a combination of changing the ways of being in your normal life, understanding that certain premises can be let go of. So understanding that we're all the same energy. There's a common language in which we all speak, in fact, but it's beyond the five senses. Things like saying yes more to things in your life. So that means being more open to pleasurable things, because pleasurable things put you in a good vibrational state, and it makes your attraction point of a higher vibration and more frequency of that state occurring in your life. Accepting that you're an energetic being. I'd say meditating. And for those people who can't meditate, learn to be in a place where they're in a flow state or a relaxed state, more where their right side of the brain is taking over rather than the analytical left side of the brain. Asking to blend with your higher self, listening more to the intel you're already getting. So shutting down that external monkey chattering mind noise and listening to that intel you're getting already. Acting on your inspiration, learning how to feel what a trance state is. I channel in a trance state. Lots of people who channel are conscious trance channels. They're in a trance state. That's that feeling when you're deeply relaxed, or when you're under hypnosis. So learning to know what that feeling is, maybe doing a self-hypnosis thing, like a YouTube video, following along, and just so you're aware what that trance state is, where you're fully alert, but you've kind of taken a back seat, you're kind of a witness. Learn to frequent these kind of states of mind and states of being. I think that how does a normal everyday person learn to channel? It's learning to live in these kind of ways, where you're in a feeling space more, you're in your right side of the brain, you're more relaxed, you're a place where you're in kind of theta brainwave states or flow state. It could be art or listening to music. It doesn't have to be meditation. Being lighthearted about it though as well. Of course, on the channeling training that I do, there's a lot more that goes into it than that. Learning about the history and the different kinds of things you can channel and the different kinds of ways they can communicate, and learning to protect yourself, ground yourself, learning to start feeling the energy body, for example, your aura.
I've heard this before, that these abilities are latent in all of us. They just need to be awakened. Okay. Same thing with mediumship. We all have it. And there are those that have past life memories and those kind of experiences that will say, as we were a 5D civilization thousands of years ago, where telepathy was normal.
Yes.
We were much were involved. In your experiences channeling, have you had any insights into some of those civilizations that were more advanced than we are?
Well, I believe that that's the way humans lived anyway. They were more in the mythic kind of way of living. Take shamanism, for example. It's the oldest practice known to man. It's been around for thousands of years and practiced all over the world. Similar techniques, even though people live far away from each other, from Siberia to Australia to Celtic Europe to South America, North America. Shamanism was practiced widely and they trained for it. It was a handed down knowledge and experience, and people moved freely in and out of altered states, and they were able to anchor down into their normal waking consciousness information from guides that they would meet, including spirit guides or human guides, so they could help their community or somebody who's sick. That was normal. That's a normal kind of humanity version of living, very much in the mythic, very much in the imaginal world. I think what's happened is over time, society and living in the West has become more material, it's become more individualistic. At the same time, there have been certain systems placed on us where our information is centralized. So we've lost a lot of our individual sovereignty. We've forgotten a lot of our divinity. We have a centralized money system. We have a centralized information system. A lot of the masses of Western humanity tend to look outside of themselves for information or for power. Ancient humans didn't. It was decentralized knowledge because they're able to tune much more into the wider consciousness, their higher selves, and communicate with other transdimensional beings. It was much more normal. There was that kind of innate knowledge that was free and fluid then. So, of course, earlier humans were more fifth dimensional beings. What I've just said doesn't indicate that exactly, but I do believe that we've had rises and falls of civilization on the planet. We've had lots of setbacks with our evolution. Certain civilizations, clearly, we see it a lot, have reached kind of technological superiority, but they haven't quite evolved spiritually with it, and then they've kind of imploded on themselves. You've probably heard that we're in the sixth mass extinction is happening on the planet.
That I'm not familiar with, but what I have heard, and yes, forgotten divinity comes up. It seems that when we channel our higher selves and or our spirit guides, that seems to go hand in hand with training our consciousness for ascension, raising our vibration. Yes. You agree?
I agree. I think it's about learning to decompartmentalize the consciousness. Human consciousness is compartmentalized. So I think there are a number of things to do to train and to practice to learn to have more fluid consciousness where you're able to join the dots, so to speak, because communicating with other beings, it's not about communicating with your ego and it's not about communicating with your head. It's a language above and beyond that, something that you may feel on the whole of your body as a whole holistic system, one coherent system, but your head doesn't understand it because it's a compartmentalized part of your consciousness, and it keeps information that it may be perceiving on a wider level compartmentalized by suppressing it or invalidating it. Oh, that you didn't hear that couldn't be true, you didn't see that, oh, that was just a blur, things like that. So learning to channel or learning to be a medium or learning to connect with your guides or your higher self is a case of learning to be in that trance state or letting that chattering mind quieten down so you can read other kinds of information in that common ground.
What's the difference between Tarp's guidance and your guidance?
I've channeled Tarp long enough now to have it filtered down. A lot of what they say is kind of filtered down into my knowing now. The thing is, when someone comes to see me, they might have a combination, for example, spiritual life coaching with me. They have a consultation first with Tarp. Tarp gives them the big picture, their purpose and their direction. And then with me afterwards as a spiritual coach, I'm able to anchor it down into use practical tools with them. So hypnotherapy, breath, breathing techniques, plans and strategies, how they get in their life and how they take their steps to do the bigger picture that Tarp has spoken about with them. So I'm able to give them the kind of mental side of how they go about implementing and making the changes they need to make for better health or happiness.
When you channel Tarp with your clients, let's say I'm your client, so I'm actually there present while you were channeling and you were asking questions about what I need to know about my purpose or whatever the question may be that I have at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, so the client asks Tarp directly the questions. I'm in trance, so I'm not speaking at that point. I've stepped out the way. Tarp speaks through me. My voice changes a little bit. My hand gestures and my head and face, they're moving according to Tarp. It's not me, it's Tarp. They ask their questions, they get their answers. Then I come out of trance and I still have a memory of it. It's like a dream. It will fade over time for me. I don't remember after some time has lapsed what really was said to that person. They remind me on subsequent times when I meet them. Then I can discuss with the client what was said while it's still fresh in my memory. We can make notes and we can make plans, and then we can work through a number of tools to make a roadmap of how you make these changes and implement these things to get where you need to get in your life.
Do you ever record your sessions?
Yeah, lots of people want them recorded. Sometimes I do free group sessions where people just tune in and they listen to Tarp speak, and that's always a recorded thing.
Do you have those on your website as well, some of the recordings?
Some of them, yeah, and there are some clips on my YouTube channel.
Okay. So we talked about how you kind of stumbled into the channeling and how you discovered it and how you've grown and how that's directly related to the evolution of consciousness, and hopefully gives us a roadmap to where we want to go as a civilization. We want to be less dense and more like a light being, I would think. Is it related to moving from 3D to 5D?
Yeah, I think the movement, the upward inclination that we have is what every species has. It's all a directional journey upwards. The 5D aspect is actually a group consciousness rather than an individual, I am just an individual separate, I am Gayle, you are John kind of consciousness, which is what we're in now, right? We're in a consciousness very much that involves opposites, contrast, me versus everything else, everything that's solid, everything that's real. The 5D consciousness is about learning to experience from a heart-centered place. It's about learning to live from the heart chakra rather than an ego place. So learning to understand more unconditional love towards the world, everything you see around you, understanding that there really are no differences. When you can lessen the differences and see the sameness in everything around you, recognize that you are God, John, you physically now here are God, speaking to me, who's God, right? And my cat that may walk into the room is also God. And the person I interact with in the shop tomorrow is also God. So when you can learn to see everything else other than you as the same as you, as all God playing out itself, then you can learn to feel the oneness. That's how you find the unconditional love, knowing in the sameness of everything else. That is that kind of behavior that is moving us more towards a fifth dimensional consciousness, a group consciousness.
And I think what's also part of that is learning to recognize that separation is an illusion, because you just mentioned oneness.
There's some pretty interesting stuff around that, because have you heard of the concept of mass consciousness?
Not mass consciousness, no.
So you've got the idea of the morphic field, the term invented by Rupert Sheldrake. I think he's a biologist, but the morphic field, which means causal influence across time and across a species. So it means that when enough people resonate with an emotion, it, like a tuning fork, the consciousness around it will start resonating with the same frequency. And then that frequency resonates back onto the mass of people. It's like a perpetuating loop. For example, during the pandemic, there was a sort of mass consciousness of fear, and it was kind of looping back. So the individualized fear was feeding the mass consciousness, and then the mass consciousness was feeding back on the group. So there is such a thing as mass consciousness. Jung termed it mass consciousness.
It's not the collective unconscious, is it?
Yes, that's another name for it. It's been referred to by Jung. Yeah, and Schrödinger, the quantum physicist, referred to it as the one mind, the singular mind. Although there might be many billions of minds, in fact, there's only just one mind. So an interesting perspective on this is that when somebody is channeling trans-dimensional perception, it might be contact with an ET, it might be another dimensional being, but these are almost directed through the mass consciousness as having the very purpose of confounding us, the very purpose of making us wonder, making us question, so that we can go through some kind of decompartmentalization, some kind of deconstruction of our current psyches, because we need to have that deconstruction so that we can get that fluidness of consciousness, be more non-rigid, move away from these Newtonian physics, Newtonian way of conducting science that's very rigid. We need to sort of move towards a more open, less rigid way of being. And that involves the realm of the imaginal, the realm of the non-physical, which is almost the same as how ancient man used to live in mythic times and using shamanistic practices. It's in the realm of the imaginal and it's in the realm of the mythic. It's not in the physical.
Now, I imagine your book, which I believe is coming out soon, Awakening to Channel.
Yes, it is, yeah.
When is it coming out?
The end of January. Yeah, there's a wait list that can be joined for the book as well on the website.
Really interesting stuff, Gayle. Thanks for joining us today. How can our listeners find out more about you online?
My website, Gayle, Gayle Thomas, THOMAS.com. You can download the free roadmap to channeling and you can put your name down on the waitlist for the book.
Good. I will put that link in the show notes and in the transcript as well. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. You can also leave us a review on iTunes as well. For more info, go to closertovenus.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.